In this video, we're going to talk about loops. Loops are something that allow us to repeat our code over and over again, and as we'll see, they're very useful, especially when dealing with arrays, which we talked about previously. We have a list of items, and we want to do something to every item on that list. So let's start out with the simplest kind of loop, which is a while loop. It's not as commonly used as the for loop that we'll learn soon, but it is very similar in the syntax to an if statement, so it's maybe a little easier to understand. So let's create a variable, x equals 20. And now, let's say we were going to use an if statement. We can say if x is less than width, then, so if x is less than the width of the screen, draw a circle at x 200 with a width of 30. So if we do this, our if statement is going to check if that's true. It is true, and so it's going to draw a single circle in that position. Let's run that. Great, we got our circle. Now let's say I wanted to draw circles all across the screen, spaced evenly in some programmatic way. Well, I could just change this to a while loop. And so now, instead of just checking if that's true once and running the code once, it's going to keep running it as long as it's true. So I can say, while x is less than width, draw a circle, and then each time I do that, I'm going to change the value of x by some amount. Let's change it by 50 so we get some space between our circles. And so the first time it's going to go through the loop, x will be 20, it'll draw a circle at position 20, then it will add 50 to that, so then x is going to be 70, it will draw a circle that's still less than the width, and so we'll draw it at 70, and then we'll add another 50, and we'll draw it again, and then again, and again, until the circle is off the screen, and then it will stop drawing the circles, because this condition is going to be false. So if we take a look at that, bam, we have our circles drawn across the screen with our while loop. Now I put this in the setup function instead of the draw function, because the draw function is already a loop, and having a loop inside of a loop can, do some weird things a little bit. I mean, this simple code would have worked, but for this example, it's really, this is just happening one time, and then when it gets to our loop, it's stopping and doing this over and over until it finishes the while loop and this condition is false, and then it goes on to whatever is next here. So that's the basics of a while loop. It's really simple. It's very similar to an if statement. Again, it just does it over and over again. But the most important thing to understand about this is that there's three things we need for this to work properly, because if we just test for a condition here and this condition is always true, then we have what's called an infinite loop. And the problem with an infinite loop is that it's going to get to this while loop and it will just keep doing it over and over and over again. It will never stop, it will never go to the code that's after it, it will never finish the program, and we get stuck. So we need some exit condition, some way for the loop to eventually stop. And the most common way to do that is to have some sort of variable, which is like a counter variable, and that every time we check against that variable, and then we increment that variable by some amount, and eventually when that variable gets too big, the loop will stop. So therefore we could do something 10 times, 50 times, 100 times, or something like that. So just bear that in mind, because now when we jump over to our for loop, so our for loop is going to do a very similar thing. And now here I have the text that we had before when we were showing our array. So this is our little shopping list. I'm just going to comment this out for now. And so in the past we were just printing this text at we are printing my shopping list at, let's say, 100, 100. So that just prints out the entire array in one line. But let's say we want to print each item in a different place, let's say on a new line. So for that, we need a for loop where we need to say for the first item in the array, print it out, then go down a couple lines, certain amount of pixels or whatever it is, print out the next item, then the next item, then the next item. So instead of doing it that way, we're going to use a for loop. And I'll just type this out again. So a for loop, it takes those three aspects that we need for the while loop to work, and it puts them all together. So we get a counting variable, we get the test condition, and then incrementing our counting variable, but we do it all in one place. So the basic syntax is similar to an if statement, or while we say for blank, do this. But in here we put all three of those things that we need. So we say put our index variable, it's usually called I for short, but it's, for now we'll call it index just so that we remember what it is. So we're starting to count our index at 0. Then we're checking the condition to see if it's true. As long as the index is less than my shopping list dot length. So the length of our list, which in this case is 4, as long as index is less than 4, then this is true, and so it's going to iterate over our loop. And then every time it finishes, we want it to increment. So I'm going to just do index plus plus, but we could do plus equals 5 or index times equals 2 or something like that. We could change it however we want in there. So this is just what happens. It sets a certain variable before the code starts. This is the thing that we're testing if it's true or false, and this is what we want to happen every time our code finishes, usually incrementing an index. And then inside of here, we put our code. I'll just copy this, and what we're doing is we're taking the my shopping list, but instead of printing out the whole thing, we're doing the item that's at the index's current value. So first we're doing my shopping list 0, then we're doing my shopping list 1, and then 2, and then 3, and we're printing each one out, and we're always going to print it out at the x position of 100, but each time we're going to do it at, for y position, 100 plus the index times 20. So that gives us a way of automatically adding space between these items. And so we see, if we print it out, bam, here we have our list, and each one is printed out on a different line. And if I add something else to here, I don't know, let's get some fruit, and that just gets added on. So we can see how this is something very powerful that we can use to make, let's say, a shopping list app or a to-do list app, but also most web applications, if you think about them, like 80% of them are just lists. There's lists of pictures, lists of articles, lists of posts, lists of comments. Your bank account is a list of your transactions, and so being able to take a list of items and then do something to each one, display them on the screen or whatever, manipulate them in some way, that's unlocked by having arrays with for loops, and so it's a really, really common combination we're going to use all the time when we jump back into web development. I'm just going to show you one more example where we're going to use this to do something, to animate something, and so here I have a list of y values that each one represents a circle. I could have generated this programmatically, but just for now I printed it out because it's, it's just a pattern. And then for each one we're going to have the speeds, which we are going to generate. And so the first thing we're doing is that we have one for loop up here that's going to go through each item in our list of circle values, and it's going to put a speed in here, a random speed corresponding to each circle. So for 0, there's going to be a speed here, and for 1, there's going to be a speed here. And we're not going to see it printed up here on the screen, but the computer is going to put that in memory. And it's going to give us a random speed between 1 and 5. And then down here, we have another for loop that's again starting I equals 0, I is less than this circle values.length, I plus plus. So we're looping over these values, and for each item, we're going to print out draw a circle that's at 20 pixels plus I times 30, so that's just spacing them out by 30 pixels each and starting at 20. And then it's going to have a y value that corresponds to these y values and a size of 20. And then we're going to move each one. So we're accessing circle y value I plus equals speeds I. So each one is moving by its own speed, and then we can say if that speed is greater than the height, it will bounce just like we would with one circle, but now we're able to do it with 10 automatically. So we can see, let's run this program, and here we get 10 circles with random speeds. They all fall down. When they hit the bottom, they all go up. So this is, and I'll leave you a link to this, but this is an example of how you could use arrays and for loops to animate something and do more complicated, interesting things where you want a lot of items on the screen. Maybe somebody clicks and it creates a new item, and then when it hits something, that item disappears or something like that. And you can do that with arrays and for loops.